We are continuing our study of the book of James. We are finishing off chapter 3 this morning. Last week we did verses 1 to 12. Now we're at verses 13 to 18. This is a wonderful chapter that we've been going through. The first half, of course, if you remember, focused on the tongue, focused on how we should speak, focused on what we say, focused on the idea that it is very difficult to control what you say and that the tongue is very difficult to tame, right? That's the first half, verses 1 to 12. Classic section of the book of James. Verses 13 to 18, he focuses on wisdom. And one of the things I've noticed about the book of James is that he often goes back and forth. He spends some time on some sort of practical topic, and then he does a topic centered around wisdom or doing what you believe, something along those lines. And he kind of bounces back between the two, practical and principle, practical and principle. And so in chapter 3, verse 1 to 12, he's very practical, talking about the tongue. And now he's coming back to principle, right? Now he's talking about, okay, why are we doing these practical things? Why are we controlling what we say? Why are we trying to control our tongue? It's because we're trying to be wise. And what is wisdom? And so James kind of talks about what God's kind of wisdom is, right? Wisdom as defined by God. Now, wisdom may have different definitions depending on who you ask, but what James is trying to establish is God's kind of wisdom. And this is one of the major themes of James's letter. It's kind of a broad topic that covers all aspects of life, right? Like just being slow to anger, quick to listen, being slow to speak, watching what you say, avoiding prejudice, right? And discrimination, we talked about that. And all of these things kind of all relate to wisdom, right? And so that's what his topic is going to be for verses 13 to 18 of chapter 3. Let's go ahead and have a prayer. Lord Almighty, we thank you, God, for this morning, and we ask, God, that you would guide us as we open up your word. We ask, God, that we would focus on your truth and nothing else, that we would not seek to justify our own beliefs, but come to understand your truth, that we would come to your word and ask, how should we change? How should we live our lives? And not looking to justify what we currently do, but rather seeking to live a new life pattern after you, that we come to you seeking your truth, seeking your wisdom, and putting aside what we may have considered wisdom, which is truly foolishness, that we may seek your wisdom and to be wise in your eyes, just as your Son, who lived the perfect life, was wise. We pray this in his wonderful sacrifice. Amen. So we are looking at James 3, verses 13 to 18. What is wisdom as defined by God? Now, the second half of that question is a little bit trickier, isn't it? So what if let's just open it up. What is wisdom, but not as defined? What is just wisdom? If you ask someone on the street, what's wisdom? Any thoughts? Of course. Yes.
The ability to make decisions based on knowledge and truth.
The ability to make a decision based on knowledge and truth. That's a good... What's your name, brother?
Tony.
Tony? That's a great comment, Tony. I love that. The ability to make a decision based on knowledge and truth. Isn't there some sort of saying? I forgot what it is. How does it go? Knowledge is knowing tomatoes are fruit, and wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. You know, the application of knowledge. I think I may have gotten that quote wrong. But wisdom is making a decision based on truth. What did you say? Truth, knowledge and truth. Right. How is knowledge and wisdom different? Mike?
I'll say it this way. I've known a lot of knowledgeable people that weren't very wise.
Oh.
And I've known a lot of wise people that weren't particularly knowledgeable.
That is absolutely true. I think in our world today, we really don't use the word wisdom too much. I think when we talk about wisdom, a lot of people they conjure up images of like a guru with a long beard who hasn't spoken a word in 10 years, or they think of Plato, right? Philosophizing about all the pieces of the world, right? When we talk about wisdom in today, I think a lot of the times we don't say the word wisdom. What do we say? We say common sense. I think because when you come to God's word, when you ask wisdom is not philosophy. Wisdom is practical. Wisdom, like Tony said, making good choices. That's what wisdom is making good choices. And so when we talk about wisdom today, we just say, well, that's just common sense. Well, I don't like the term common sense because the truth is, it's not that common. You know? That's just the honest truth. Is that wisdom is something that is very obvious that you should have already thought of, right? Wisdom is a piece of advice that is so clear, and you're like, why didn't I think of that, right? Wisdom is very clear and very, not common, but very obvious, but sometimes it's not always something that we think of. And when we think of trying to ask about what God's wisdom is, we're asking, how do we make choices? By what standard do we make choices, right? And this is kind of the practical value of our faith, right? Wisdom is the practical value of our faith, in that living as a Christian should make your life better to a good degree, not completely, right? Every person who seeks to live a godly life will suffer persecution. That's what Paul said. But if you live wisely, you avoid a lot of the frustrations in life. I mean, you say, well, it's wisdom. Well, that's why people say it's common sense to say, well, you shouldn't drink and drive, right? I mean, that's wisdom, making the right choices, right? Wisdom is understanding that the more you lie, the more likely you're going to get caught. Wisdom is understanding that if you're a hothead and you're always quick to anger, you're going to get in trouble at some point, and it's going to be bad. Wisdom is knowing that if you're quick to speak and slow to listen, you're going to miss most of the things, you're going to put your foot in your mouth, and you're going to say something that you regret. Now, wisdom is focused on good choices. Wisdom, in my opinion, is focused on consequences, where you take a moment and you ask yourself, what's the cause and effect here? If I do this, what's the effect? If I do this, what's the effect, right? That's why you're slow to speak, because you're thinking, what do I say? If I say this, they're going to react angrily, or they're going to react kindly, they're going to react compassionately, right? You're thinking about the consequences of things. And so when we get to God's kind of wisdom, because it's really important to remember that different variations of wisdom, like if you ask someone on the street, what is wisdom? Well, what's God's definition of wisdom? And that's what James is trying to establish here. And he makes a really good point how the world's type of wisdom is going to be very different than God's kind of wisdom. So it's a very short passage, 13 to 18. I'm going to read through it. Verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So, as I go through this passage, I want to look at the qualities of God's wisdom. What God's wisdom is, and we're trying to understand what God's wisdom is. And so there are a lot of qualities. They're saying, well, this isn't God's wisdom, this is God's wisdom. And so I just want to walk through the passage and say, here's a quality of God's wisdom, and here's a quality that's not God's wisdom, right? And so we look at it. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him, by his good works, by his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. I see two qualities of wisdom there. The first is active and meekness, right? So he says wisdom. What is wisdom? You know, the Hebrew word for wisdom is chakma. And I'm not pronouncing that correctly. It's Hebrew. I'm not really good with Hebrew, but it's probably something like... That's probably what it sounds like. See, the word for wisdom is not actually an intellectual word, not some sort of philosophy word. It's not even a moral word, right? It's a word about skill and technique. It's the word that you would use for a craftsman, someone who's good at their craft, right? Someone who has experience and skill. It's how you would describe a skilled artisan who excels at a craft like, I don't know, woodworking, stone making. That's the kind of word we're talking about. So wisdom is more of a skill that helps you in life, making decisions, maximizing the joys in life, and minimizing the bad consequences in life, right? The problem is that we get caught up in that philosophical belief. And here, James just establishes right at the very beginning, listen, what is wisdom? Guess what? You're going to see it by how people act and how people are meek. Wisdom is active. Is it not? How do you know whether someone's wise or not? You say, well, someone's wise because they're able to say all the right words. That's not what James says. Someone's wise when they live it out. Like Mike, you said, some people are very knowledgeable, but not wise. How do you know? How are you able to pick out the people who aren't wise? Because they don't live like it, right? They say all the right things, but when they don't live wisely, it's by their actions you see whether someone's wise or not. And so wisdom, God's definition of wisdom, comes to practicalities, comes to behavior, comes to conduct. How you live your life shows whether you're wise or not, right? And then he includes meekness. Meekness is humility, it's gentleness, it is a self-controlled gentleness. It is, what's the connection between wisdom and meekness? Or wisdom and humility, or wisdom and gentleness? What's the connection there? Anyone have any thoughts? Can you be wise without being humble? Can you be wise without being gentle? Tony?
So it's the decision-making process that you referenced earlier. It's the ability to make the decision based on truth and knowledge. So if you're arrogant in your choices, then that is a counterintuitive to wisdom. Like the intent of being wise is to help other people. Like, what's the purpose of wisdom?
Right.
Solomon asked for wisdom. God gave it to him so that he could be a better king or servant to his people.
Yeah.
So I don't believe you can have wisdom without being meek or gentle because they're counterproductive to each other.
Right. They're counterproductive to each other. I like what you said about, arrogance. I mean, what's the opposite of meekness is arrogance. Can you be arrogant and wise at the same time? No. Like when someone's trying to make a good decision, whenever they're trying to think, okay, if I do this, the consequence will happen this. But I think some arrogant people will say, well, that may be the consequence for other people, but I'm greater, right? Like, if I talk back against my boss, maybe other people would get in trouble. But what I'm saying is right. What I'm saying is, I'm so great that I won't get in trouble. And then they get confused why they get in trouble, right? I think in order to say, if I do the wrong thing, bad consequences occur, there's a little bit of a humility in saying that. To say that it doesn't matter who I am. If I do something wrong, bad things happen, right? There's a little bit of a humility there to admit that it doesn't matter who I am. If you do bad things happen to you. Does that make sense? Right? I think arrogance and wisdom, like you said, they're counterintuitive. They're counterproductive in that it requires a certain level of humility to acknowledge. Wise people would admit that they don't know everything, right? Wise people would admit I need to learn more, but arrogant people don't say that. Wise people say that I need to watch what I say because I need to watch the bad consequences. But arrogant people say, well, I'm going to act however I want to act, and you're just going to get over it, right? And that kind of behavior, that kind of attitude leads to bad things in your life. That causes you to suffer more than you should have, more than you could have. And that's what wisdom is about, is avoiding as much as you can the bad consequences and trying to maximize the joys in life. That's what wisdom is, making good decisions that benefit you in the long run. But if someone is lacking humility, lacking meekness, meekness also speaks to self-control, right? It's a mixture of humbleness, gentleness, and self-control, in my opinion, where it's like, I am going to choose to be gentle, right? That's kind of how Jesus was most of the time. There were times whenever he chose, like, okay, this situation calls for a more heavy hand, but he chose to be gentle, not out of weakness, but out of humility. And an arrogant person, someone who is lacking meekness, someone who is brash, someone who is impulsive, someone who is frank, right? So, I mean, I think we've all met someone at some point in life who's just like, yeah, I don't have any filter. Or someone who says, yeah, I just say what I want, right? It's someone who lives like that, right? And I mean, do those people tend to have a lot of friends? Usually not, right? Those people tend to live an easy life. I mean, I feel like every time you come across someone, that always has the problem. I remember the one quote from The Office. I love that show so much. There was one guy who said, I don't apologize if I don't think I should apologize. My ex-wife didn't like it, my wife doesn't like it, and my next wife won't like it. And it's like, do you not hear the words coming out of your mouth, right? I mean, it's like he's accepted that his life is going to be harder. He's accepted that he's not going to have a healthy marriage. And he's just like, I'm just going to behave how I want to behave. Like, that's not wise. You are hurting yourself in the long run. You see, God's wisdom says that you are meek, that you are humble, and accept that you have to control how you behave, and there are consequences if you don't. Humility is meekness is trying to be gentle whenever a heavy hand is not the right approach, right? And so wisdom affects how you approach things. It affects how you behave, right? Pride, I mean, it's kind of like being pride and being harsh. It tends to alienate people. It tends to make people not want to work with you. I mean, being harsh all the time makes you look rude and unloving. I mean, good luck having friends that way. You're going to ruin your family, your friends, and your job. But if you choose to be gentle and humble, in the long run, it benefits you. And this is what God's wisdom is about, is choosing the right path for what is best. Questions, thoughts, comments? Mike?
God's Spirit living inside you will bring about gentleness, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. So it's not always about choice. It's choice of walking with God, having God live right inside you and bring those fruits out that makes a wise life.
That's a good thought. Mike connected how the Spirit within us, walking with God, makes you gentle, patient, kind, right? It has a transformative effect upon us, that it's not just, well, I'm choosing how I live, I'm choosing how to behave, but if you're living God's way, it'll cause you to live gently. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, the quote you made from The Office, that certainly wasn't God's Spirit at work in that person's life.
That's right. The man who said, well, I don't apologize, my ex-wife didn't like it, my wife doesn't like it, my next wife won't like it. And Mike said, that's not God's Spirit. And he's right. Is that a Christ-like attitude? No, it's not. It's someone who has resolved that his pride is worth more than his marriage, right? It is not a humble person. It is not someone who controls how they behave, right? Okay, verse 14. And so here we have more characteristics of what God's wisdom is not. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. So some things that God's wisdom is not: bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, and false boasting. Boasting about lying, right? And so whenever I first think of these characteristics, right, these characteristics are not God's wisdom, and so you think about the opposite is God's wisdom. Meekness, humility, gentleness. If you're meek, humble, and gentle, you're not going to have bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, and false boasting, are you? Right? And so he's almost kind of contrasting things. If you find yourself with these characteristics, then you're lacking humility, you're lacking gentleness, you're lacking meekness, because being prideful and harsh is the opposite of meekness. And being prideful and harsh leads to bitter jealousy, leads to selfish ambition, leads to boasting falsely, right? And I like how he says bitter jealousy, bitter envy. And you could even translate this to say bitter zeal, Z-E-A-L. It has that idea of a blind fanaticism, an ugly rivalry. You are passionate about being bitter. You have this mean spirit about you. Why is bitter jealousy not wise? Tony?
You can take that passage, if you go to 1 Corinthians 13, it's the opposite of what love is.
Ooh, good thought.
Love is not puffed up, right? Love is not jealous. It doesn't do those things. So really what this is trying to say that wisdom cannot exist without love.
That's great. That's great. Tony made the connection. Now, you go to 1 Corinthians 13 about love, it's the opposite of these. And so when you have love, you're going to be wise. Like wisdom and love coalesce in that, right? Because these are the opposite of love. And if it's the opposite of wisdom, then that means wisdom and love are on the same page here. Great thought. Kevin, did you have something?
Bitter jealousy is what led Cain to kill Abel.
It's what led Cain to kill Abel. Oh, yeah. Bitter jealousy. Cain's a great example of bitter jealousy. Whenever Abel had a sacrifice that was accepted and Cain did not, he was bitterly jealous. That was that ugly rivalry. He was passionately bitter, right? He was passionately angry. I've known some people who were passionately bitter. No one wants to be around them, right? Is that the kind of person that's going to get promoted in a job? Probably not. Is that the kind of person who's going to have a lot of friends, a great family, a great marriage, right? Probably not, right? And it's just practical. And I love how Tony connected it back to love. You're not being loving. There's a practical value to loving, right? God says you want to be wise, don't have bitter jealousy. I think one of the things about 1 Corinthians 13, what was it? Love
is patient, love is kind, love is not puffed up. It does not take account of rights and wrongs.
All right. The one I was thinking of, does not rejoice in wrongdoing.
Yeah, does not rejoice.
See, love, when you see other people doing well, you ought to be happy for them. That's what love is. Like, I'm happy for you. I'm not saying there aren't moments where you're like, oh, I'm just a little bit jealous.
It does not envy.
Does not envy. Thank you. Great. Love doesn't envy, right? And so when you see others doing well, I'm not saying there's just a little bit of, oh, I wish I was like that too. But it should rather encourage you to work harder, right? There have been times when I've looked at other people whenever I'm like, oh, I wish I was kind of like that. Oh, I wish I had that. Oh, but it's not a bitter jealousy. Bitter jealousy is when you let it take hold of you, right? It's not just of I kind of wish I was like that, or I kind of wish I got that, or something like that. But it's whenever you crave it. It's the coveting. It is the envy, not just jealousy, but bitter jealousy, where I'm angry about it, right, Mike?
So that is the ultimate selfishness.
Selfishness.
It's all about me. It's all about you didn't treat me right. You did, why did you not see my greatness? That sort of thing, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And you're right. It's bitter jealousy is rooted in selfishness, and that goes next to the next one: selfish ambition. Not just ambition, selfish ambition. Tony, did you have something?
Yeah, so I think it's important to read that little passage, if you don't mind if I do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. And so I thought that's great. When you're talking about the wisdom side of this and what is not wisdom, it is love.
You're right. Mm-hmm. Great thoughts. Yeah. Selfish ambition. So, is ambition wrong? Right? It really comes down to, right, what is ambition? Seeking to do better, seeking to climb the ranks, seeking to get in a better position. Here he says selfish ambition, right? The word kind of correlates to a political partisanship, right? Aristotle would use this word to describe a self-seeking pursuit of a political office by unfair means. And so this word kind of has a background of a jealous or angry leader forming a group that withdraws from someone else, right? It's selfish ambition. It's creating a clique to further your ambition, right? It's doing it by unfair means, right? Again, this kind of roots back to bitter jealousy in that you're jealous and you want something and you're craving it and you're bitter, you're selfish. You're just focusing on me, 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 me. And selfish ambition, God says, is not wise. Why is it not wise to have selfish ambition?
Because it's about self.
It's about self. Practically, what are the bad consequences of selfish ambition?
You don't care who you step on to get it.
You don't care who you step on. Yeah. Being unfair to others, it catches up with you. It really does. Now, some people may be able to get away with it, and some people may be able to get away with it for a long time. But it catches up to you, whether in this life or in the next. But a lot of the times in this life, it catches up. If you mistreat people to accomplish your goals, it ends up coming back to haunt you. You may get to the top, but then you're going to be all alone. Or the people who hurt you are going to gather together and tear you down. Your methods are going to become public. Your reputation is going to be ruined, right? I mean, how often do we hear about these celebrities or these billionaires who, it turns out they weren't so great people, right? It turns out they did terrible things to get where they are. Well, those things do come back to haunt you. I mean, you look at, God's kind of focusing the heart here, right? These issues are not just issues of what you do, but who you are and what you think. James is really big on connecting for what's inside and what's outside. If these sins are in your heart, you're not supposed to let them rule your life. If you have problems inside, don't let them leak outside. He's telling us, he isn't telling us to be hypocrites. He's telling you to rein in your temptation. He says, if you have these things in your heart, if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't let them lead you to boast or be false to the truth, right? He's saying that evil in your heart needs to be removed, and the first thing to do is you need to stop pursuing it, right? He talks about boasting with lies, denying the truth, right? When you brag, people are going to expect results. And it's the classic scene of when a guy brags about his skills, and then someone asks to see his skills, and then he's caught red-handed. Classic. People who lie are going to get caught at some point. That is just part of it. The likelihood of you getting caught is going to increase the more you lie. And so when you lie and lie and lie and lie, at some point you're going to get embarrassed, right? Clint, did you have a thought?
I was just going to say, I agree with what you're saying. The other humility is considering others before yourself. So
Right.
you would love others, right? If you want to serve them.
Absolutely. Absolutely connecting it back to love again. How that if we do these things, we're going to love others. Or if these are the opposite of love, again. And things like bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, or lying. More characteristics in verse 15. More characteristics of what wisdom is not. He says, this is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. So, James acknowledges people may call this wisdom, but it's not wisdom from above, right? This is not wisdom from God. Here are 3 definitions of wisdom that are not from God on top of what he's already given us, right? He says earthly, unspiritual, demonic, right? And you could really, when you're asking what is God's wisdom, you just reverse these 3. God's wisdom is heavenly. It is spiritual. It is, what would be the opposite of demonic? Godly? That'd probably be best right there. And so earthly is, as opposed to heavenly, it's created by humans, not created by God. This isn't from God, and if it's not from God, it's probably wrong, right? He calls this fake wisdom unspiritual. It is devoid of the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God. It lacks the power that comes from God. It lacks the authentication of being inspired and approved by God. He calls this fake wisdom demonic. Isn't that an interesting term, right? Doesn't James also allude to demons in chapter 2? He said, the demons believe in God, but they shudder and they fear him. And so James is alluding to the demons who, they may believe in God, but they don't obey God. right? And so this kind of wisdom is not in obedience to God. And so these are the kind of ideas that make people filled with bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, and false boasting. These ideas are earthly, they're from human origins, they're unspiritual, they're not from God, and they're demonic, meaning they're displeasing to God. And it should make us reflect on why we do what we do. We should reflect on what we believe and how we think. Is our wisdom like this? If you were teaching people how to live a good life and make smart decisions, would you be encouraging them to have bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, false boasting? No. No, you wouldn't. Thoughts, comments? Verse 16. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. And so God's definition of wisdom does not include disorder or excuse evil. And so, isn't it interesting how disorder is in there? Why is disorder unwise? Why is order wise? I think it was, which chapter is it? 1 Corinthians 14, that God is a God of order, or is that 12? One of those. God is a God of order. Why is order wise?
Well, that's the purpose of creation. When God first created it, it says the Spirit was hovering over a formless, voidless, disordered situation. And God didn't leave it like that.
That's right. At the beginning of creation, the world was in disorder, and God came in and created order. Well, I think part of it is that order is required for peace, right? Without order, you have chaos. You have confusion. You have confrontation. It makes people against each other. It makes a competition or a free-for-all. There's no harmony, right? Friends, family, coworkers. Jealousy and selfish ambition makes you focus on being better than them and seeing all of them as your competition. And so part of the problem with these things like bitter jealousy and selfish ambition is that they help justify terrible things, right? It's best, if the best thing in your mind is to be better than other people, then you won't have a problem tearing someone else down or cheating to get ahead, right? And so if you are filled with jealousy and selfish ambition, you're not going to be interested in following the rules, right? If someone is interested in following the rules, that's probably because they have a level of humility to admit that they're not above the rules. But whenever you are focused on being better than others, whenever you are focused on being better than that person or getting ahead over that person, then you're not interested in following the rules. You don't mind cheating. You don't mind cutting corners. You don't mind jumping over people, right? And it's going to excuse you being disorderly, and it's going to excuse vile practices. It's going to excuse evil. You don't mind doing things if you're just focused on me. You see what I mean? I think that's kind of the connection there. Any thoughts? Okay. So verse 17 and 18, he just literally just gives us a list of things, what wisdom is. So far, he's really talked about what wisdom isn't. Now he's going to talk about what wisdom is. He says, verse 17, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And one of the major things I find with God's definition of peace, or God's definition of wisdom, is the emphasis on peace and goodness. All the descriptions of fake wisdom or earthly wisdom, they involve treating other people poorly, ruining your relationships. Bitter jealousy, selfish ambition, false boasting, these things are treating others poorly and ruining and destroying peace in your life. God's wisdom values peace. It values treating other people well. It values doing what is right and what is good. So let me ask the question, why is it wise to be peaceful? What are the practical values of being peaceful? Clint?
I guess just from love in your heart, it's just a better way
Yeah, when you have peace in your heart. Yeah.
Just the selfish stuff.
Yeah, when we're speaking about what benefit it gives to us, it is beneficial to have peace. Partly whenever you have peace in your heart, you're not filled with anxiety, or you're thinking more clearly, right? You're able to make better decisions. What practical benefit is there to being peaceful with people and avoiding conflicts? What practical benefit is there?
You'll have friends.
You'll have friends. Seriously, and that's nothing to sneeze at, honestly. Having friends is an amazing thing. Having good relationships with your family, I think everyone in here understands, well, most people are going to understand that having bad relationships with people you love and care about hurts really bad. You know, whenever you have good relationships with the people you love, it's a very wonderful thing. And God gave us our families and our friends, and these are part of the blessings of life. And having peace brings greater blessings. You know, people who seek to cause conflict, people who seek to cause disruption, people who want drama, people who are backstabbers, who seek to gossip and slander, all these things are not peaceful, and they bring more trouble to your own life. You know what I mean? When God told us what to do, He knew what He was doing. Whenever He told you, well, why don't you just love your enemies, right? Instead of trying to fight against people who don't like you, why don't you go to them and ask and apologize? He knew what He was doing. He showed us how to live a better life, increase the quality of your life. And I understand that's not the major benefit. We're trying to please God. But God created it so that these things increase the quality of our life, so that you have good friendships, you have good families, that you try to turn an enemy into a friend instead of just escalating a conflict greater and greater and greater, right? I mean, there is a practical benefit to that, and that's what we call wisdom. Wisdom is maximizing the joys in your lives and minimizing the troubles in your lives. You're always going to have trouble, but wouldn't it be so much better to reduce the amount of trouble you're going to have in your life? Well, if you live God's way, you're going to do that. You're going to reduce the trouble in your life. You're going to have peace. And peace maximizes the blessings in your life. Instead of fighting with people, instead of being at each other's throats, you're going to have peace with each other, and you're going to be able to focus on what's good in life. And so He gives us this long list, right? Purity, peaceable, gentleness, right? Purity. Purity is the opposite of bitterness. It's the opposite of jealousy, the opposite of selfishness. It has nothing to do with evil. It's just goodness. Wisdom is supposed to be pure. It does not allow evil. It forbids evil. Wisdom is gentle. Gentleness is very necessary, right? Gentleness is the willingness to bend when necessary. It's not being combative. Gentleness is the opposite of looking for a fight. It's compassion, care, empathy, solving problems without causing unnecessary pain. I really love this one. Wisdom is open to reason. I love that one. Being open to reason. That's how you learn, you listen, that's how you solve problems. If you're looking for peace, then you're going to have to learn and listen and glean information from a situation. You're going to have to hear people. And if you disagree with someone, you're going to have to hear from their side and understand who they are. Reasonableness is the willingness to obey, the willingness to go along, the willingness to comply. But you have to be open to it, right? If you refuse to listen or even to think it out, guess what? You're not open to reason, and that's unwise. Gentleness and open to reason doesn't mean that you let people walk all over you. It doesn't mean you're easily persuaded, but it means you're willing to be persuaded. It means you hear people. You don't retaliate. You care about a person. You act carefully. It means you seek what is true, what is right, and what creates peace. God's wisdom includes full of mercy. It's wise to give mercy because we have received mercy. The parable of the unjust steward who was forgiven of everything and yet refused to forgive others. That's unwise. Mercy is wise because the truth is everyone makes mistakes And we have that humility to acknowledge we all make mistakes. I make mistakes too. And when I make mistakes, I hope someone's merciful to me. It makes no sense to be overly critical of mistakes when we ourselves make mistakes. God's wisdom includes good fruit. Fruit is the product of a tree. It's the tangible, visible result. It's the practical results of wisdom. God's definition of wisdom includes impartiality. James talked quite a bit about that in chapter 2, where he talks about how do you treat the poor. When you treat the poor poorly and the rich well, you are doing wrong. God's definition of wisdom includes sincerity, impartiality, or sincerity, right? Being sincere, not fake, not hypocritical, but sincere. In verse 18, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. Righteousness is that which is good and moral in the eyes of God. Righteousness is supposed to be the end result of peace. Peace is planted like a seed, and righteousness is the crop that is harvested, right? So James is really, I think he's really hitting on the two biggest aspects of God's kind of wisdom here in this verse. Peace and goodness. Out of all the qualities that God likes, I think he's emphasizing these two. When it comes to wisdom, when it comes to how you make your decisions, when it comes to why you do what you do, these two things have to be the major factors. What is good and what is peaceful. What is good and what brings about a good amount of peace in your life. What does not upset people. What does not cause conflict. It's not saying that we eliminate conflict altogether. Sometimes what is good does cause conflict. And Jesus is following the example of Jesus, when what is good does cause conflict, you got to swallow that conflict. You got to accept the conflict. But a lot of the times it's a question of what is good and reduces the amount of conflict, right? What is good and creates peace, right? And so how to avoid bad consequences, how to make good decisions, how to live a good life. Well, you got to focus on these two things, peace and goodness. Any final thoughts? Mike?
Romans chapter 12, beginning verse 20. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you'll heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
Overcome evil with good. Absolutely. And Jesus knew what he was talking about. There is, again, when I talk about wisdom, I'm saying there is a practical value as to why we do these things. Your life will be better. And I think that's what God wanted. God wanted us to have a higher quality of life. Not saying it'd be a perfect life, and that's not why we do these things, but there is a practical value to living like a Christian. You will avoid all these fights. You will avoid all the escalation. You will just have better family, have a better job, have a better relationship, right? These things are good, and that's what God wants from us, right? All right. I will end there. Thank you, guys.